Hi everyone, I'm Lee Sensei. For those who don't know me, I am an archer and archery coach. For those who do know me, I'm also an avid gamer. Now, archery and games go a long way together, and in fact, I'll dare to say that many people get into archery because of video games. You see them in every genre, from real-time strategy to first-person shooter, and especially in settings where the bow is used alongside modern weapons, it does have a special place in our hearts and is always a fan favorite. Whether it's a traditional bow or one of these modern compound bows, it's always something which you want to pack in your inventory for those special moments. But of course, games are games, and there must be liberties taken to ensure that gameplay is balanced and fun and rewarding. That said, there may be some generalizations and assumptions which are made which could mislead people as to how archery works in real life. This video will go through 5 things which could be seen as mistakes by games, whether intentional or not, that are really poorly reflective of what archery actually is. Now, a few disclaimers and caveats. Well, firstly, why only 5? There could be like dozens of these things, and that's fair enough. I've only picked the first 5 I thought of as generally trends you see in gaming. Obviously, many games don't follow the same mistakes or the same tropes. Therefore, it's kind of unfair to generalize on every part of gaming. And of course, some games may take more liberties, while some games may be more accurate. And of course, I understand that gameplay and balance comes first. I'm quite happy to overlook certain things and I won't be too pedantic. Nonetheless, hopefully you find some of these things interesting, especially if you're thinking about doing archery in real life. Number 1 on my list of mistakes is instant mastery. Now, this is quite fascinating because depending on the backstory or the character in that particular game, this may or may not be plausible. But one thing you will find in many games is that your character has almost perfect proficiency in archery, no matter what bow they use. Again, some cases are justified. There may be an experienced hunter, there may be a warrior, they may have prior experience. So if this person actually has a real reason why they would use a bow, then this does make sense. But if you assume a character that hasn't done archery before or has no background that would expose them to archery, so if they weren't a hunter or if they were just a regular civilian, then it gets a little ridiculous to assume that anyone can pick up a bow and shoot perfectly. Now, realistically, it takes years to be proficient, and many people don't even get that far. Now, historically, if you were training for military purposes, then you would have to train from a young age and use exceptionally heavy war bows, and that will require years of physical conditioning and practice. In modern times, bows are generally of a lower draw weight and they're easily handled by more people, but you still require a fundamental knowledge of technique. Not everyone can pick up a bow and immediately know how to use it. You do have to know how things work. Even a simple longbow does require knowledge of technique, release, and so on. Without these skills, arrows basically flop around, people don't know how to get the arrow from A to B, and while you might know how to aim, getting the arrow there is a different matter. If archery was so easy that all you had to do was to point it at the target, then we wouldn't have archery as a competitive sport. Believe me, we do wish it was that easy, but it really isn't. Just as a benchmark for how much practice is involved, the Olympic shooters who train full-time may be shooting hundreds of arrows a week, up to 1,000 per week if you're training full-time, in addition to weight training and other exercises. So it's fairly brutal if you are maintaining that level of conditioning and proficiency, and that's just for the sport kind of archery. If you're thinking about combat or military archery, then that's going to take a lot more skill and practice in a more dynamic environment. In other words, as much as we want to get straight into the action of picking a bow up and using it, many people who are using these bows in games probably shouldn't be that proficient. Number 2 on my list is perfect accuracy. Now, this is something we all wish we could do, but arrows simply don't fly straight. As much as we want to hit the target every single time, it isn't that easy, and there are many variables which we have to factor in as archers. So in most games, you will see that, especially at close range, you point the reticle or the bow at the target and the arrow hits straight towards the middle or whatever you're shooting at. And that is a good gameplay reflex. It's a nice reward and punishment system. If you don't aim correctly, you miss. If you do aim correctly, you hit. And that's something which most people are conditioned to do in games. But in real life, it just isn't that easy to deliver a straight and clean shot. Even if you put a bow on a stand or a tripod and bolt it down, there are still variations to consider when shooting a bow. One of which is wind, and you notice that in most games there's no wind drift. That's one of the main factors of arrows going off target. It's through wind, especially at long distance. The other factor which many non-archers overlook is release. Especially if you're shooting a traditional bow with the fingers, the string would not come cleanly off the fingers every single time. There will be some variations, some fluctuations in your technique. We are not machines, and that's one of the biggest hurdles that an archer has to face in achieving consistent shooting. It takes years to develop that skill to become second nature. A lot of beginners will have trouble trying to get the release and the things coming off cleanly. So again, when we combine this with number one, we have a new archer or a non-archer pick up a bow and deliver a shot on target immediately. Believe me, anyone who's done archery the first time never does this. It does require knowledge of how to use a bow. Number three is overpowered lethality. Now, this is a funny one because people really overestimate what arrows do to a target. Now, can arrows kill? Absolutely. But were arrows that lethal? The answer is no. And of course, it depends on which arrow you're talking about. There are armor-piercing arrows with narrow points. There are broadheads with cutting edges. So being hit by the right kind of arrow in the right place will deliver a kill. So if you're hunting with an animal or a person or a zombie and you have a broadhead, cutting edge, and you slice an artery, then you'll probably bleed out very quickly. But for many arrow wounds, on the knee or otherwise, it's not going to really kill you. It might cause debilitating injury, it might take you out of action, but arrow wounds seldom killed, and historically, many of the bodies found in historical battle sites didn't have lethal archery wounds. Most of the deaths were caused by melee weapons and more often into pursuit after the battle rather than the battle itself. So arrows had a very big psychological effect in terms of lethality. Not that common to kill someone outright with an arrow. If you think about it, most arrows are there to deliver puncture wounds. So unless you hit a really critical area like the eye socket and pierce the brain, arrows probably aren't going to take down a person in a single hit. Now, this is in contrast to many games where, due to balance reasons, the bow is a slow sniper weapon which can kill in one hit, and that's probably not going to happen. The arrow might not get past armor, it might not get past even skulls or bones, and especially in a modern context, or even an ancient context where you have people wearing different armor and accessories, the arrow might just glance off something. I mean, we've had stories of people blocking arrows with their cell phones. But if you think about someone who's wearing, modern armor with different pockets and attachments for like binoculars or cell phones, then it's very likely you won't get a clean hit and therefore not get an instant kill. Number 4 on my list is arbitrary power. Now, in many games, they don't really have a scientific damage model. It's a fairly arbitrary system. This weapon has X damage and this weapon has Y damage. And for bows, this bow might have 6 damage, this bow might have 10 damage. It doesn't really explain why, and most of the gameplay doesn't really alter the power of the bows to reflect their damage model. Either it's a one-hit kill or it's this does more damage than the other. In real life, one of the big factors we have to understand is draw weight. Not every bow is the same. The same model bow can come in different weights, and bows are made to be at different power levels, you can say that. So you might have a 15-pound bow, you might have a 30-pound bow, a war bow might be 100 pounds. So understanding the strength or the draw weight of the bow combined with the kind of arrow used will determine the damage potential or damage output of the bow. Games will simplify this with just simply this compound bow is more powerful than this recurve bow. So the type of bow is not indicative of how strong it is. Many people do have misconceptions about longer bows being stronger and shorter bows being weaker, or modern bows being more powerful, and so on. It really comes down to the draw weight of the bow, whether it's a heavy draw weight or a light draw weight, along with the arrows used. And the last thing on my list, which may be surprising to some, is stealth. Bows are often used as the stealth weapon, especially in modern games when you have firearms and then you have a bow, whether a crossbow or a compound bow or even a recurve bow. Bows are seen as the quiet weapon. Now, are bows quiet? Relatively speaking, yes. It's not a firearm, it won't go bang and everyone knows where you are. But of course, games will exaggerate the effects of silent weapons, like a suppressor basically turns a heavy rifle into a gun, and that's pretty much unrealistic. Are bows under the same problem? In a way, yes. Bows are fairly quiet, but they do make a sharp twang or a sharp snap, so it is something which will stick out if someone is paying attention. It's not a natural sound, so the twang of a bowstring or the clack of the limbs will be audible, especially if you're in that nighttime scenario where you're sneaking and killing guards with a bow. That's probably not going to happen for all the above reasons. One, you're probably not that good. Two, it's not going to go straight. Three, it's probably not going to kill. And four, if it hits somebody, they'll probably shout at you and therefore ruin your stealth. Of course, gameplay is gameplay, so don't let these things ruin your enjoyment of a game. Don't let that pedantic attitude stop you from liking a game. As a gamer, I will overlook certain things and will accept that certain aspects of archery just need to look cool. Anyway, what do you think? Are there any other notable mistakes which I've left out? Post your thoughts below. There might even be a part 2. This is New Sensei. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.